That's my imagination. People of God, it was Albert Einstein, who is widely considered by many to be one of the smartest men to ever live, who said that imagination is more important than knowledge. He said imagination is the most creative force that has ever been given by God over to humanity. People of God, if we were to do any research at all, there are many examples and testimonies from persons who can attest to the power of imagination to keep you sane in the midst of insanity. One such example is a fellow by the name of Colonel George Hall. Now, Hall was a prisoner of war in Vietnam and was kept in a black box in total darkness for 7 years. And every day for 7 years in total darkness, in order to keep his sanity, he imagined himself playing golf. I said he imagined himself every day for 7 years while living in a black box in total darkness playing golf. And you all, it was only 1 week after being rescued from living in a small black box for 7 years in total darkness that was designed to break him mentally and eventually kill him physically that Hall drove to New Orleans, Louisiana, played in the New Orleans Open, and shot an impressive score of 76. He would later be asked, Colonel Hall, how were you able to so quickly come out of conditions that were designed to break you mentally and quite even possibly kill you physically, walk onto a golf course after having not played for over 9 years, and shoot such an incredible score? And Hall replied, I was able to do it because for the last 7 years, all I did was imagine myself in it, and now I've moved from imagination to manifestation. Another such example is a woman by the name of Kira Findlay. Now, Kira Findlay was a Jewish teenager at the time of the Gestapo, and she lived underground in Berlin during the Holocaust. And while she was by herself living underground, she saw many people die, many people mutilated, many people wounded and cut up. And as she witnessed all of this while living underground by herself, she kept herself alive. Don't miss this now. She kept herself alive by imagining herself being a doctor, working on everybody that she saw was being hurt. And after surviving the Holocaust, she became the first woman to serve on the Board of Health in the city of San Francisco. She was able to survive the Holocaust and go on and live a productive life because she imagined herself in a position before she ever got there. And in one of the last interviews she did before she died, she said, imagination can actually help you transcend the insults that life will deal to you, so that when you are insulted by life, one of the vehicles you can use to overcome it until you come out of it is your imagination. Don't miss what I said now. Imagination, you all, is the ability to form a mental picture of something that you have not yet received in reality. It is the ability of the mind to build realities that do not yet exist. I promise y'all I'm going somewhere there. Now, the more I think about it, the more I think about the power of imagination, I'm convinced that's what Paul was trying to help us to understand in this particular text. Now, Paul is writing this letter to the church at Philippi to help them deal with some internal issues that they're dealing with as a congregation. And as he comes to the summation of this letter designed to encourage them, all of a sudden out of nowhere, he begins to make this letter just a bit more personal, because there were many in this church at Philippi who began to worry themselves, not about what was going on with them, but about what was going on with Paul. Are y'all praying with me? Now, you must understand, they were not worried, listening, for no unnecessary reason. But when Paul writes this letter, Paul is in jail. Now, biblical scholars are still debating over exactly where he was or what jail he was in, but they all agree for sure that Paul was in jail, and it would not be long before he would be put to death. Are y'all praying with me? And so as a result of where Paul was, the early church had grown concerned for him and concerned about him, and they were worried about his state of being. What was his mental state like? What was his emotional state like? He was locked up for something he did not do. He was about to be killed for a crime he did not commit. And what was the impact of this sinful and sadistic situation, and what was it doing to his psyche? Are y'all praying with me? So Paul says to them, now I told y'all he's locked up now, Paul's in jail. They're worried about Paul, and Paul writes them a letter to encourage them, and he says to them, don't you be worried about me. He said, because I've learned to be content no matter where I find myself. He lets them know, watch this now. He says, I am able to handle myself no matter where I find myself, because God has given me a peace that passes all understanding. I wish I had some praying folk in here. Paul is locked up in jail. He's got people worried about him, praying for him. And Paul says, don't waste your time worried about me. He says, I've learned how to be content because God has given me a peace that surpasses all understanding. In other words, people see where I am and they can't figure out why I act like I act. I wish I had somebody, because my disposition does not match my condition. I ought to be calling it quits. I ought to be throwing in the towel. I should have quit long back now. But God has put something on the inside of me that does not allow me to be impacted by what's going on around me. And then he says, I'll give you peace that will guard your heart and your mind. Can I teach it before I preach it? Now I got to say it to you again. You got to remember where Paul is. I said, Paul is in prison, you are. I said, Paul is in prison, you are. I said, Paul is in prison. Now, he is not in one of them Federal Country Club prisons that you see on TV. I wish I had somebody. You'll never get an opportunity to turn on an episode of Locked Up Raw and see Paul on prison lifting weights and watching cable TV and clowning for the camera. It wasn't that kind of situation. There was no air conditioning in this prison. Oftentimes, he was sleeping on a concrete slab. If it wasn't a slab, he was laying on dirt. I wish I had somebody. Paul is in a terrible situation, y'all. Paul is locked up in prison. I say Paul is in prison. And if you know anything at all about prison, you know when you locked up, they control everything that goes on in your life. They tell you when to get up and when to go to bed. They tell you what to eat and what to do. And not only do they control what you do, but they also control what you see. Are y'all praying with me? So Paul has been locked up in prison, listen, and they've dictated what it is he's been able to see. And he's been looking at two things. He's been looking at bars and guards. Don't miss what I said now. He's been looking at bars and guards. He's been there long enough to be able to study the guards. Are y'all praying with me? He's acquainted with how guards are supposed to act and what guards are supposed to do when they're protecting somebody that you don't want to be bothered and you don't want them to get away. I said Paul has been looking at guards and bars, and so he has studied how guards are supposed to act. So Paul says to them, if you pray to God, he will give you peace. And then when he gives you peace, he'll give you some guards to stand guard over your heart and your mind. I wish I
had a collar on a beast, because you don't want the beast to go. And some of you, that's how you look at your relationship. You got a collar on your beast. Everywhere they go, where you going? Can I go? Where you going? Can I go? Where you going? Because you know if they get away, every 15 minutes you texting them, where you at? I was in the same place I was 15 minutes ago. Just because the 5 people before me was a beast, don't treat me like a beast. Preach, Bishop, I'm doing the best I can.